Hi, this is Leo Schumann. Welcome to our module on using taxonomies with content types. In this module, we're going to talk about using taxonomy as a way to categorize and access content. We'll create term vocabularies, which are sets of words that can be applied to a piece of content. We're going to enable the use of those terms for taxonomy classification through what are called term reference fields. And we'll use predefined vocabularies with term reference fields to describe content and learn how the choice of widget that we make determines whether or not a given vocabulary is treated as open or closed. So a term vocabulary is a bucket full of words. You would create it on the Add Vocabulary page. And it's a functionality that's enabled by default in Drupal 7. It is part of the core functionality. The term taxonomy itself simply means using terms to classify and categorize content. You may be familiar with this approach through other software and think of it as tagging. So here, vocabulary refers to a particular set of terms, and then we expose one or more vocabularies through a term reference field to allow the user on the edit form for a particular piece of content to add terms describing that particular piece of content. We'll then find that Drupal 7 adds functionality, for example, creating a summary page of all nodes that share a given term, as well as other functionality. To define a new vocabulary, you would choose to add a vocabulary on the taxonomy page. Once you've done so, you'd find that there are operations to edit it, list terms, and add new terms to the vocabulary. When you create a new vocabulary, you simply provide a name and a description for it, and then you would go and choose to add terms to that newly defined vocabulary. To define a term, you'll configure it primarily with a name. The name value is the literal term itself. You could then optionally provide a description for that term. You could also create parent-child relationships between terms to define a hierarchical vocabulary. It's beyond the scope of this introduction to go into that, but you would find that those relations can be used in generating certain types of visual display, such as menuing systems, with additional modules. The weight determines the sequence of terms in relation to one another. By default, they'll be displayed alphabetically in widgets that have that type of sequence to them. But you can override the sequence by providing specific weights to given terms. You'd also see that a URL alias is generated for each term to reach the summary page for all content sharing a given term. If the Path Auto module is installed, as it is with the Acquia Dev desktop, then instead of using a numeric value for each taxonomy term, it's going to use the name itself, which is mapped to it by the Path Auto module. As you work with vocabulary, there's a practice to consider as to whether or not you would have an open or a closed vocabulary. In a closed vocabulary, you would predefine all the terms and users would choose from those alone. This can simplify searching and summarization because you don't have variations on a common term clouding the results. However, having an open vocabulary and enabling users to add their own terms creates what is sometimes called a folksonomy, and it allows additional information to enter the system and new modes of categorizing information that may be beyond what you considered when you first designed the system. Both approaches have value, and vocabularies can be extended at any time. They're simply a bucket of terms. The issue is whether or not you extend them solely administratively or through controlled interfaces, or whether you enable the user to add new terms through the particular field widget choice that you make for the edit form supporting that particular term reference field. We'll take a look at both approaches in another lesson. For now, let's go in and create a new term vocabulary. In our application, I'll go to the Structure menu. I'll go to Taxonomy and add a vocabulary. I'm going to add a vocabulary genre, which will be for book classifications. This is now in addition to the tags vocabulary, which is created by default in Drupal 7. I'm going to add terms to my genre vocabulary. I'm going to add first literature, And for this demo, I'll omit a description, and I'm not going to create hierarchical relationships, though you'll see here that you could. I'll save that term, and then I'll add another. I'll add philosophy. You'd find that you can, from the name field, simply hit enter and come immediately back to the same form. I'll also add poetry and political science. Then, to take a look at what I've created, I'll go to the List tab, and I see the 4 terms that have been added, which by default are in alphabetical order. I could choose to resequence if I wish, save that change, or reset to alphabetical at any time.